Okay, so we're going to be doing skin effects using Scar Wax. The one that I've got here is the Ben Nye one, which is what you should have in your kit. I've got, I think, medium flesh. You can get light flesh, dark flesh, you can get bone, lots of different colours, but it all does the same thing and it's pretty old school, but it is super durable and you can use it for so many different things and it's used a lot still. What you do need to be kind of aware of when you're working with wax is that the hotter it gets, the more it will melt. So it will not last for hours upon hours. And you can't successfully put it onto like soft areas of skin. So you couldn't put it on like a cheek and be able to smooth it out. You need to put it on kind of like hard areas of flesh. Anything that doesn't kind of move too much, you know, like my hand is quite tight. If I was going to put this on my cheek, it would be a different story. So be selective of where you're going to put it to get the best result. And then the first thing you're going to do is put some type of adhesive down. So you're going to either use Posaid or Spirit Gum, but you're going to put something down that is going to act as a sticky base for the wax. If you don't, the wax will likely start to lift pretty quickly. So I've got a cotton pad here with some Surgical Spirit on it, and the reason for that is because that is what I'm going to use to clean my sculpting tool. I've got this janky old plastic one, but I love it, and it's stained, but I just really like it. But a metal sculpting tool or even a brush is really good, but the more you work with wax, the stickier these get, which means once they get sticky, they could lift the wax off. So a little bit of Surgical Spirit, IPA, anything on a cotton pad that you can use to clean your tool off is brilliant. So I'm going for a laceration. I'm going to do it on the back of my hand, and I want this to be small, but I want it to be realistic. So whatever you're going to attempt to do with wax, first of all, you need a reference. It's so difficult, even after doing this for however many years now, 12, 13 years, I can't always think of something off the top of my head and know that it's going to look like anatomically correct or that it's going to look realistic. Like, you need a reference image if you're trying to recreate a wound or trauma, and that way you can really notice the little details that are going to make this look real. Whatever it is you choose to do, be it a laceration, a puncture wound, it could be a bullet entrance hole, it could be like an animal bite, whatever it is, you need to build it from the ground up. So you can't just put a great big slab of wax on there and expect it to, you know, do a few little bits and bobs and it all of a sudden come together. You need to build it from the ground up. So the deepest part of the kind of wound is what you're going to start with. And I want to create something that looks a little bit like the kind of fatty tissue that you would find if you were to cut or accidentally slice deep enough into your hand or wherever. You would have a little bit kind of textured fatty tissue. So I'm kind of doing that centre part of my wound first. And it's quite often, if you look at the texture of it, it's kind of almost like a spongy texture. Kind of little dots on it. I'll tell you what I've got, which, let me grab it. It's really handy. If you ever go into the pound shop and you see these little naff little packets of like nail art tools, these are brilliant for effects because you get that tiny little metal thing and you get some nice skinny brushes. These are always pretty good for really, really fine sculpting. If you want to create a little bit of difference in your texture. So that's going to be my kind of inner layer of my laceration, and now I need to kind of do the flesh that would have once been closed and is now split open. So I've got two kind of tiny sausages, and these are going to be my edges. I change up the way I do cuts. Sometimes I will put a big blob of wax on the skin and I will take bits away, and sometimes I create sausages and kind of layer it up. You need to experiment with this and see how you prefer to do it. But if you want realism, And this is the way to do it. You start with your bottom layer and you build up. I'm just going to clean off the tool so there's no junk stuck to it. And what I'm going to do is now try and smush that into the skin, but I want to take away as much of the wax as I can, because less is more. I'm kind of building up the shape, but scraping away anything that I don't need. If you start spreading this around too far, the wax will leave like a residue on the skin, and if you use too much, you'll find that when you start to paint or colour it, it will affect the way in which the paint sits on the skin. So try not to get it spread around too far and wide, if you can help it. And what you also need to remember or pay attention to is the fact that wax is really smooth and your skin is not. And depending on the area that you're applying this, skin has pores, it has wrinkles, it has fine lines, it has texture. So you're going to need to, once you've finished creating your shape, you're going to need to go in and give a little bit of texture back. To the skin. So I'm gently just kind of teasing the wax into a rough shape that I kind of like. And I'm going to give that a nice wipe off. Now, the wax is starting to get hotter, and the more I mess with it, the stickier it's going to be, and you might find that you actually lift it off. If you find it's getting too sticky or you're worried it's going to come off, you can get the tiniest amount of moisturiser or Vaseline and put it on your sculpting tool or your finger, and you can use that as like a barrier, like a lubricant between the wax and your tool, and it will enable you to blend it in without it sticking to you too much. I think I can get away with it without right now, but I'm just going to take a little bit of time to really blend those edges in. So, the process from the beginning. First thing I would have done would have been to put my spirit gum or Pros-Aide down to act as a really sticky base to help the wax stay put, to make it last longer and be more durable. Then I would have kind of started with my deepest layer of detail and then built up to my outermost layer. And then once I'm happy, I need to give it a little bit of texture. This needs to still resemble skin. So there's lots of things you can use to give it a little bit of texture. You could use a stipple sponge. You could use a little bit of cling film and just tap that over. If you scrunch up cling film into a little ball. I'm going to use just a little kind of stiff-ish brush, just to give a very, very subtle texture that will help make that look like it's real skin. Once you've done that, then you're going to seal this up by painting another layer of spirit gum or Pros-Aide over the top to kind of seal it into the skin and encapsulate it so that it stays put and it's not going to move around too much. Okay? I'm not going to do that for the process of this because I want this video to not be too long and I don't want to have to wait for spirit gum to dry. So I'm going to paint this up with grease paints. Got a lovely scabby looking grease paint palette, but I love this one, but it's very old. You've got better ones than me. So grease paint palette, but what I also have is a little bit of IPA, which is isopropyl alcohol, which is what you could use if instead of using grease paint, you're going to use your alcohol-based paints. That's what you use to activate them, but you can use it with grease paints, and it takes grease paint, let me show you, from being, hold on, it takes grease paint from being, you know, oh, let me not ruin my cut, really opaque. If you use a little bit of IPA and the tiniest bit of grease paint, you can get a nice kind of colour wash watercolour situation. So this is really good for, like, you know, full coverage if you're doing some type of crazy monster. This is what you want if you want translucent skin effects, because the skin is kind of translucent. You can see through the layers. So I'm going to use two types of brushes. I'm going to use a super skinny little thing, and I'm also going to use, if I can find one, a fluffy brush. Just remember, don't use your nicest brushes. You know, if you've got some really posh eyeshadow blending brush, do not, for God's sake, use it with this, because oops, it'll ruin it. So painting is going to make or break this. If you do too much paint, it's going to look like something from a joke shop. It's going to look like, you know, Sainsbury's Halloween stick-on effects. But if you don't kind of layer up your paint enough, it can also flatten your sculpture and make it look a little bit rubbish. So what you need to do is incorporate, and I'll show you the colours I'm going to use, yellow tones, red tones, and kind of like a burnt orange tan tone. And you can use this on any skin tone, from black skins to the whitest pale skins. This kind of tone will neutralise anything that's too red or too yellow looking. So that's like your mid-tone for kind of like blood effects. I really like it anyway, it works. So I'm going to use a little bit of red. And I'm just going to start stippling over my wound. And I think what people do when they paint these is they kind of paint all over it in like a dark red, and you completely lose the sculpt. I want to bring a little bit of colour into the wax without making it look bruised, because generally with a fresh laceration you're not going to have lots and lots of bruising instantly. But what I do really like, and what you can see is happening there, is see how the bristles have clumped together because you've got the IPA making them wet. When you stamp them, they give you that kind of mottled effect, which does look really nice when you build it up, and you can do some lovely bruising with that. So you want the kind of imprint of the brush. And that IPA will evaporate off of the skin. It won't look shiny forever. I've lost my little skinny brush. So I'm going to go in now and fill up my little wound. And I'm going to use some of that yellow for the kind of fatty layer under the skin. And bring in some red. Now I'm working under a tiny little, oh it's rubbish, a tiny little ring light thing. So the colours on my screen look a lot more amped up to what they do to the naked eye, but that's good. If you've got a ring light, don't just use it for your Peng makeups, use it for your special effects as well, because it does give you a better idea of how things will be illuminated once under studio lighting. So you can get that ring light out for your gore as well as your glam. How about that? That's bugging me. I just want to... So this is another lovely little thing about using IPA, is that if there's something you don't like, you just use a bit of IPA on its own and you can kind of like melt the colours away a little bit if you're not feeling it. Just get used to building up lots of different tones. And you see the benefit of doing that inner layer first with the edges around it. It then does make it look more deep. It's hard to get that effect any other way, so it's worth putting in the time. I think there's a bit of glitter. Of course there's green glitter in my wound, for God's sake. So it definitely needs you can see it's a little bit pale up here. So I'm going to take the tiniest smidge of red and that kind of tan colour. Tap that over with a bigger brush. And I'm actually not feeling that bit still. Tone that down. Oh yeah, I don't mind that now. Anyway, you can get carried away. I'm getting carried away. I just want to sit here and paint into this all night, but don't rush it. Take your time and you will get such cool results. So once you're happy with it, then you can go in with your blood. Now, blood is amazing because it can hide a multitude of sins. If you've absolutely mucked it up, a bit of blood slapped over the top will save it. Brilliant. However, if you've spent ages sculpting and creating this type of wound and then you slather it in blood, you lose everything. So less is more. Don't go completely mental with the blood. I know it's tempting, but just don't do it. So you want some kind of coagulated gloopy bits. But you also want a little bit of runny blood, don't you? So let's get a tiny bit. I think I've probably done too much. Easy done. Should we have a trickle? Let's have a trickle. We've gone too far of it now anyway. Anyway. The aim of the game when working in wax is I don't want to see really visible edges. I shouldn't see a big line around the edge of what you've done. I also don't want to have loads and loads of projection. So when it turns to the side, I don't want it to be this whopping great thing stuck out this high, because that's not realistic. That isn't how it would be if this was a real wound. with your painting and your colouring, oh dear, with your painting and your colouring, lots of different tones layered up. Use yellows, reds, you can even add a little bit of purple in there. And keep playing around until you get something that, you know, is subtle but picks up nicely on camera. Don't forget to put spirit gum down first and afterwards to help kind of seal it and keep it stuck to the skin. Remember that wax will melt. So if you are doing this on a client or, you know, more glitter. But if you're doing this on a client or, you know, for TV or film, if this gets hot, it will melt and it will flex with the skin. Removal wise, you can just scrape it off and use Pros-Aide remover or spirit gum remover, depending on the adhesive that you used. But scrape it off and it won't cause any problems. All right, that's it. Sorry it's so long, but once you've had a little practice with your wax, make sure you get a really nice close-up picture because we're going to need it for your lookbook. All right, I'll see you soon.